I think one of the most important things, and it's one of the biggest shifts, I would say, over the years, is that we really think about these identities as being fluid, that there's a spectrum, whether you call it the LGBTQ spectrum or the queer spectrum, but there's a spectrum of identities around sexual orientation, around gender identity, and there's a lot of fluidity, and that's not how we thought about it years ago.
Clinicians who aren't identified as LGBTQ, it really helps to have curiosity and, to the degree possible, lack of judgment, and, if possible, to be aware of the knowledge you don't have, because faking it is something that usually people pick up on. So being honest and being forthright about what you know and what you don't know is really important.
And I would add, just not to make any assumptions about gender or about sexual orientation, and let the person just define it for themselves. And I guess the other thing would be to just be, like you were saying, Jamie, just comfortable, and it's not about who somebody sleeps with or how they identify. You know what I mean? They're a person first, and that's the most important part of it. And I think the goal would be to just find out who that person is in all kinds of ways that one defines themselves.
Terms are all over the map.
LGBTQ, LMOP.
Right. I think one of the hardest things for people who are trying to get comfortable with this area is that they're very worried about the terminology. And so I think what's most important is not to worry about being politically correct, but just to worry. It's kind of what Sue was just talking about, and Jamie both. Being open, being curious, listening to people, going with whatever language they have, because the language is constantly changing, and it depends on where you are, what community you're in, what part of the country, what country you're in. It's just very fluid.
I wanted to add a historical piece that this community started out as the, quote, gay community, which usually referred to men or to white men. And over time, obviously, that was very exclusive. So later on, it was the lesbian gay community. And as we've gone on, we've discovered how exclusionary that can be and how we are trying to be more inclusive as a community. And that's why the initials have expanded over time.
And just because you find out, so for example, I am married to a woman, but I wouldn't necessarily identify myself as gay or lesbian necessarily. And what I have noticed, especially among young people, which I don't necessarily am not that, but but for those young people out there, what I've learned is that there's more and more of this spectrum, and people don't want labels. And there was a term that Doug Braun Harvey mentioned. Do y'all remember what it was?
GSRD.
Gender
and sexuality, relationship. Diversity.
Yes. Yeah. So, and what was so lovely about that was that it captured everything, the whole spectrum. And so can you say that again?
Gender and sexuality, relationship, diversity.
So there you go.
It's from the UK, right? That's where they use the term. I think the other thing I want to add when Jamie talks about historically is that for years what we were talking about was sexual orientation. And really the focus of the discussion has changed a lot to gender. It's much more, I work with student panels, and the students hardly ever even use the terms gay and lesbian and bi. What they talk about is that I'm gender fluid, that that I'm queer. So they're focused much more, young people, on gender than they are on sexuality and sexual orientation.
So what's the difference between gender and sexual orientation? What are you guys' first associations with that?
Well, so gender is really a much more internal feeling. It's about how I feel, and usually we think about it on the dimensions of male to female, but these days people are really thinking about it much more fluidly. Do I associate with a gender? What gender is that, or genders? And is that fluid? Is that sort of more static? Sexual orientation really has to do with an interpersonal dimension about who am I attracted to, who am I affectionate with, who do I choose to sleep with, who do I dream about. So gender is really a much more intrapersonal, and sexual orientation is more interpersonal. The pronouns. So this has really become, it trips a lot of people up. Right? So I think that, again, because of the dichotomy that most of us grew up with historically, the pronouns are she and he, right? But now we have a lot of people who use other pronouns. The probably next most common one is they and them and theirs. And I sat on a student panel recently where the question came up like, I don't understand they. What's that about? And it was really helpful to me to hear this young person talk about, because I don't just feel exclusively male or female. I feel like a mixture of both, and so they really expresses that. And then there are other ones that some people use. It depends on the community you're in, with Z and Zer and Zim. But I think that the three that are most common are the two that we're used to, and they, them, and theirs.
And again, I think the most important part of this is that there aren't assumptions made, and that we gender people all the time, and misgendering someone can be very painful to someone. So the idea is to, our assumptions are unconscious. We don't even know, so that when we are thinking male, that comes with a script. And when we are thinking female, if you were going to just sketch it, it comes with a script. And those are all assumptions that we're making about both. So I guess one of the challenges would be to just always be questioning trying to catch your assumptions. And that's where queerness comes in, because then it's new and different and disruptive. And that's the pride about that, about being queer.
Also, I just want to mention that Webster's Dictionary accepted they and them as a singular pronoun last year. So it's not quite that sort of weird and bizarre.
The SIG group for me has been a welcoming focal point for the convention. And it's really important because previously a lot of continuing education I've been on with my profession and so forth has not been very welcoming. It's often been very isolating. And so coming to a large conference, it's been great to be with other LGBTQI people and to feel welcomed by our group, to feel we're in a position to advocate for inclusion and for education that's relevant to us, and to feel visible in ways that are very powerful, including on the dance floor, traditionally Saturday night, with our rainbow stickers. And just a sense of connection and a sense of community has been very important to me.
I think that one of the differences in SIGLBIT, so the special interest groups, a number of them are focused on what people do for work. So the psychiatry SIG or the chronic mental health SIG. But this SIG is really, while that's true of some people who come to this SIG, that they work primarily with LGBTQ clients, for many people it's about identity. And especially because some of us go back years in the SIG, we come from a time where people came into the SIG who weren't out in their professional lives and who had a lot of shame about what did this mean about being a professional who was somewhere on the spectrum. And so, as Jamie was saying, it's really, I remember my first AGPA, it felt so big to me and I didn't know where I could be me. And it's been a home for me for, more than 2 decades within the organization.
That's great. And, just what I would add is that if you are a person considering coming to AGPA, thinking about getting involved, just thinking about coming to the conference, it is the most welcoming place. And many people say that it's actually where they make connections that you meet people all across the country, well, really internationally. Mm-hmm. And several people have spoken about how that's where those connections really happened. And not to mention, it's really fun. I can remember times of going country and Western dancing with the group, and it's a lot of people end up gravitating, regardless of their identity and their fluidity. We end up we're the fun group. That's what I would say.
Both Sue and Rita I've known many years, and there's a real close connection that comes out of first being passionate about group therapy or group practice, and then feeling connected to other people. So fortunately for some of us, we've created lifelong friendships that are very profound and have colleagues who are very connected. So it's a really unique gift to have that experience really coming out of the SIG.
The other really exciting thing about it is that folks that are involved and that are around a little bit and take a leadership position in this organization and in the subgroup, we have a say when it comes to the larger group, and they really listen to us. And so when we are able to, it's a way of funneling up ideas that would make this community more welcoming. And we're pleased overall at the response. And So it's also a way to communicate with the larger organization and give voice to people who otherwise wouldn't have a voice.
So things like having gender-neutral bathrooms at this year's conference,
Yep.
which is something we've talked about for a number of years in the SIG, and then it moved up in the organization, the idea.
We just want to extend a special welcome to anybody who is hearing this that hasn't been to the group conference. It is the best training that you can find, both personally, you're going to get a ton, but then also professionally. Groups are a fantastic way to do work. So we invite you to come.
And if you do come to the next conference and you see one of us in the hallway with our rainbow sticker, please pull us aside and ask us how we can welcome you in any way possible.
You can pee next to me.